to make sure that they're able to check in, and I'll do the usual thing in terms of uploading this to YouTube after the fact and putting the link on our performance measurement site, just so that for posterity and handover purposes and all that kind of stuff, you guys can still check it out. Okay, so now you guys will get a chance to sort of comment on how it went this past year and that sort of stuff, because that's what this is all about, is basically asking people, asking you guys what your experience was and letting you know about some of the tweaks that have been put forward, not only by you, by other MFRCs, but also some suggestions by family members when I ran some of the performance measures by them. So I'm Jonathan from Military Family Services. I look after performance measurement. I've actually been called, what was it? I was called something by the Veteran Family Group the other day, the evil stats monster. So hopefully that's not my reputation out in the field. but yeah, I try as much as possible to hold these meetings. So again, even though we have to leave at 1 p.m. today, if there are enough questions that we need another meeting, I'm happy to set that up as well. I'm just going to mute everyone's mic just because it sounds like there's a little bit of background noise there. And please feel free to unmute, and if not, I'll unmute when I ask a question. Okay, so let's get started on this part of the presentation, and then I want to get to your questions about questions and comments about how it went this year. So, first of all, as you've probably seen, oh, hang on a second. This is not the right presentation that I uploaded. Sorry, my apologies. So anyway, disregard the slide. It looks exactly the same as last year's, and I guess for some reason I copied the wrong one. So basically, the first thing I wanted to talk about was the new online survey. You guys received the email this morning about basically we had to move from Fluid Surveys because Fluid Surveys is owned by the American company SurveyMonkey, and they decided to basically roll everything in Fluid Surveys from Canada back into the U.S., which is actually against Canadian privacy laws. We cannot use, we can no longer use Fluid Survey if the information is hosted in the U.S. So we had to look for another survey tool. It took quite a while because everybody in the online survey market found out about Fluid Survey's move and jacked up their prices. So we had to then look at a number of options. So we've now got the checkbox tool, and I sent you the link to that this morning that I'll be sending out to the EDs and the board chairs. That'll be our new online survey tool to fill out, and hopefully it works pretty similar to Fluid Surveys. Hopefully it won't be all that difficult a transition to move into that. One thing I wanted to mention about the new online survey tool, and actually I'll just, so that this doesn't get confusing, I'm going to switch it back one slide there because I'm not talking about what's on the slide. There is a save and continue. Just like with Fluid Surveys, there's a save and continue button at the bottom of each page. So you can go in and just enter some information and then save and continue. Now, the one thing about that is that you're prompted to keep the link, which will take you to that part of the survey, the partially filled out survey. So that may be a useful thing if you want some of the staff in the MFRC to fill out some sections of it. I know sometimes it's a shared duty. So you might just want to advise them and try it out in advance as well, just so that you get a chance to see what it looks like. But basically what it does is when you click Save and Continue, it gives you a link, a hyperlink, that then you go back to that partially completed survey. So anyone who fills in something has to get that link and then send it on to the next person who takes it from there. So again, try it out with the link. And see how it works, and let us know of any issues that you run into, because this is a fairly new tool that we're using. In terms of the second point I wanted to make, there's only 6 points, by the way, until we get to how it went this year, is the fact that we're removing Veteran Family Program from the survey tool. So just to let you know, I should have prefaced with this. What we're talking about today is the new items that are going to be collected by you, the stats that will be collected by you starting 1st of April 2017. So this doesn't affect the stats that you're submitting for this past fiscal year up until 31st of March 2017. Okay, that hasn't changed. That's stayed the same because I didn't want to change it partway through the year because you started gathering last April. But this is what we're talking about today. Any changes, those will be effective come 1st of April next month, 1st of April 2017, when you start collecting data for that fiscal year. So just to be clear about that. So what I was thinking is that we could remove the Veteran Family Program part of that. There's several questions that have veteran families mentioned. We now have a separate statistic gathering thing that's been mandated by Veterans Affairs for gathering stats, so it's no longer necessary. So as much as possible, I like to take out stuff that's not necessary, and I'm very reluctant to add anything because I already know that it's a fair amount of data that you guys gather. In terms of another item you might have noticed in the survey that I sent, I'll just pop it up on the screen here. The file that you got sent should be a Word file that shows some of the changes and track changes. Now you might have noticed right in this section here, stakeholder awareness, I've changed it a little bit. You can see in track changes. So basically the reason behind this is that we wanted to gather two measures of awareness. First of all, we wanted to find out how much communications output we're putting out there. So that's actually that's letter B there, Family Service Product Info Supplied Without Request. So this is basically the stuff that you sent out, like pamphlets to families, that shows how busy we are in communications and the burden of effort of reaching out to stakeholders. But the other side of stakeholder awareness is engagement. How much are stakeholders, like family members, aware of our services and asking for more information? So that's where the demand for information, the letter A there comes from. That's why I broke it down into two parts, because we also want to know how many family members are aware of services and actually want to know more, because that shows family engagement rather than just awareness. So that might be families in military asking for brochures or information about particular services, and that this shows real uptake in the family interest in services. So that's where that breakdown comes from. And the next thing I wanted to mention was just language tweaks. There's a few that you probably noticed. So I'll just move on down. So we've got new board members. Let's see if, yeah, so right down here you've got a number of new board members brought on this year. The reason why I framed it that way is just to give us a more accurate idea of board turnover, because we know that you guys have a lot of turnover in your boards, and a lot of the time a board member will come on board but then get posted out, or something else will happen where they have to leave the board. So this is just to give us a better, a more representative formula. Now the next page, you might be wondering, what the heck do I mean about direct client care? So this is meant to take out the elements which are not substantive direct client care. So it focuses on number of hours, which is units, which is how we define units of service. The reason why I entered this is because, as you probably know, the Government of Canada has implemented an entire performance measurement structure for all Government of Canada agencies. D&D has taken this under hand, so Chief of Military Personnel Command has decided to have all the agencies develop their own performance measures under specific framework that she set out. So, so fortunately, we were quite far ahead of this, but there are several measures.
The system has detected that a few lines are still connected to the conference and will attempt to end it.
I'll just end that teleconference since no one's using it. CMPC basically set out a framework, and their working group suggested a few measures that we add or tweaks to our measures. And one of them was this units of service. They really wanted to know what are the number of services accessed by families. And in order to do that, we need to have some way to be able to compare education services with employment services and whatnot. So we chose units of service as hours of service. So basically that's where it comes in terms of the total hours of direct client care. It's number of hours delivered in employment, education, childcare, and mental health services. So that's where that comes from, in case you're wondering what was Jonathan thinking about that. The employment one, and again, this is only for this upcoming year. This isn't for this past fiscal year, just so that you don't feel like you have to go back a year to look at this data. Employment, this number of family members who got a job or an interview was added. And the reason for this was actually family members were saying, hang on a second, I've got a quote from the family member. One of the family members, actually several of them, said, I don't want to know how many families have taken the resume writing course. I want to know how many have received an interview or a job after receiving MFRC employment services. So we thought, okay, how are we going to calculate that? So, so we thought of including this as a measure because chances are the employment coordinators have the opportunity at some point to check in with people who have received services just to see how they're doing and if they need other services. And at that point, hopefully you can ask about, you know, were you able to apply any of those to get an interview or a job? Because that'll be a really good stat to show essentially the direct impact of employment services. And the last change was under mental health services here. You can see I've just added the first category there that comes from the mental health, the MFS mental health framework that was put out by Linda Manser and the mental health working group. So I wanted this to be basically mirror what they've done in that working group, and they did add that additional element of the mental health services in terms of outreach and engagement. So that's why I added that. So that was all I had to talk about, but I'm going to open the floor to you guys. So bring it back to here, and why don't we just go with Kara, since she has her.
Hi, Jonathan. Just a
there. Let's see if we
question about the veterans part.
Sorry. Yeah.
Hi. Okay. A question about the veterans numbers this year. Are we still reporting them within this? Because I know you're getting stats from the veteran position and they're very specific. So are you still asking me to submit 1B? And I think is that the only one?
Yeah, you can forgo that this past year as well because we're already gathering that. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions from folks? Claudia, Aaron, Jens, Valencia? Yeah, okay, Jens? Oh, maybe I have to unmute you. Hang on. There we go.
Okay, we good?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, perfect. Now my question is, of course, when you mentioned just then that this is for next year, next fiscal year, 2017, 2018.
Yeah.
So I got a staff meeting immediately after this, of course, so we're all bent out of shape now to make sure there's any changes for this year so we don't have to go back and recapture it. So this is for next year, so we're good for this year.
That's right.
I just need to confirm that. That's okay. It's going to cost me.
Yeah. And that's why I wanted to front end the presentation with this, just because you know, that's the reason why we noticed during the past year that there were a number of issues with some of the indicators, but I was really reluctant to change anything because that, I mean, the number of centers who are gathering all this and the number of people you have involved with statistics gathering, I think once we set the yearly statistics gathering, we should really have to live with that for a year, just because it just makes it awful for you guys to have to go back and backtrack.
Okay, for sure. All right, perfect. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, Claudia. Oh, hang on. I'm going to unmute everyone here because there we go. Okay. So Claudia? Claudia, did you have a question? Oh, I wonder if the audio is not working. Can you? Okay.
Only able to check mark.
Clarify the board turnover. Okay. So she wrote in the chat, can you clarify the board turnover? So board turnover, let's have a quick look at that. I think it's down at the bottom here. Okay, so board turnover is calculated the same way as it was before. What I'm just asking for is one additional piece of information, which is how many new board members you brought on this year, because sometimes the numbers that you provided in the past, I have to kind of do a little bit of guesswork as to who has actually left during the year, and that's in order to develop a turnover rate. So you can see, if we just skip to the guidance at the end here, board turnover. Yeah, I've left the guidance basically the same as last year in terms of the way that it's described, that a board member departure or a board member leaving is it may be due to a discharge, layoff, quitting, or retirement. And an active board member is a person, and I'll change those dates, in the past fiscal year who was actively serving at some point. So they don't have to have served for the entire year. It's just they have to have been active at some point in the past fiscal year. Now I'm just going to check the chat. Does that answer your question? Okay, perfect. Excellent. All right, and okay, Kara, did you have another question?
I do.
Okay.
I'm just wondering, Jonathan, I think I had emailed you a couple of weeks ago. We didn't receive feedback on last year's submission, so as we near this next year's submission, I guess, how do we know that you got what you needed, or that we were like in the ballpark, or all of that?
Yeah. So the latest that you should have all received, and if you didn't, I can send it to you again, was the framework. You remember we had that Tiger Team meeting several months ago about the new framework for showing service delivery stats. So basically it had it broken down by categories, and then
small, large,
groups. Exactly.
Yeah.
Groups of MFRCs, small, medium, large, in order, because you can't really compare a large MFRC with a small MFRC. It's not really comparing apples to apples. So that's the framework we're going with. I've submitted it up the chain of command, but because of all the stuff that's been going on around budgets and all that kind of stuff, they haven't had a chance to look at it yet. So what I need to do is get authorization from them that yes, this is the way that they want the information displayed, and yes, it's appropriate to send to each one of you guys. Because what I then do is send you each your MFRC's stats and how they compare with the other cohorts.
Yeah.
And that way we can have a conversation about it. Because really, I mean, stats are not useful unless they help us sort of look at things in a certain way. So hopefully there'll be a good discussion that comes out of that in terms of, you know what, maybe this measure isn't exactly what we're looking for. How can we improve that in the next fiscal year, and those kinds of discussions. But unfortunately, I can't send out all those. I've got all the MFRC results already done, but I'm not able to send them out until the chain of command has had a chance to look at them.
Do you think that's going to influence this year's submissions for 16-17?
I don't think so, no, because
Okay.
basically what I did write in the I believe I wrote it in the briefing note that that any changes, and this is the same with the Veteran Family Program, any changes made to the statistics really has to be made before the fiscal year starts, because otherwise we're back.
Absolutely. When it met as the last time as the TACA team, you had mentioned that you were, and I understand you had to go through different hoops, but it was imminent that you were going to contact some like one-offs or like ones that you had just questions about that looked different.
Yeah.
So did you do that? So was that addressed or? Yes.
Yeah, and at that point I had Rochelle working with me, and so she was able to contact many of the MFRCs and get some precision on how did you calculate this, and some of the MFRCs were like orders of magnitude outside of the average for their cohort. Okay. So in that case, usually it was just interpretation errors.
Sure. I just didn't know if we hadn't heard whether that was bad or otherwise.
No, yeah, it wasn't everyone that needed to be contacted. It was just a few outliers because we want to make sure that we're all gathering the same information the same way.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have a couple of questions.
Okay.
Okay. Just I think one of the newest additions from the handovers that happened at the Comox MFRC.
Yeah.
So one of the questions I was wondering about the 3B, the new edition, that is asking about information that's being sent out unrequested.
Right.
Or we send out our program guide to all of the families that are on our list. Is something like that being calculated into those numbers?
Yes.
Okay.
So basically, just to let you know, we gather a lot of these stats we have to gather them for us too. So for instance, for military family services, what we would calculate underneath this would be all the brochures that were sent out to the various stakeholders, including MFRCs, but also the Ombudsman and all the other stakeholders that we have. All the briefings that we offered, both out to the MFRCs as well as the JPSUs and various other groups. So that's how we calculate that info supplied without request. The with request would be where we actually have a family calling us up through the family information line and saying, can I find out more about childcare, or can you send me your latest mental health framework or mental health services and point me to the right place on the website. That kind of stuff is where they clearly already know some information. They at least knew the family information line, but they're asking for more, so that shows engagement.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. And then for 12, new 12, I guess, B.
Okay.
Employment.
Yep.
Adults and youth who have been connected with employers. Is that our employment and education coordinator, like when they're with her in the meeting, or someone that she's connected them with, or what are we looking for there?
Yeah, okay. So usually, and if this is not clear, we can definitely change the wording before April 1st. But under the guidance on looks like page 8 of the document, I just mentioned the adults and youth connected with employers. It's a total of all adults and youth who you can confirm made a connection with potential employers as a result of MFRC employment services. So this is including not only those people who've gotten an interview or a job, but have submitted a CV and maybe had an information interview, so met with a potential employer even though there were no job openings to find out more about their services and that sort of stuff. So
that would require some type of follow-up from the coordinator. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And so, and chances, I mean, in some cases, this will just be where, you know, the the employment coordinator has found out through the grapevine that someone has submitted a CV, or the person has come back to them and said, I submitted it to this company, should I change it for this company, that kind of stuff. So gathering those stats, but it's supposed to show the overall impact of the services. So what's been the impact for families.
Okay, and then 16, the other sources of funding.
Okay.
AI is asking for MFS public funding.
Yes.
And our FinAdmin is wondering what revenue is this and how does it differ from revenue reported above or below in VII. Oh, wait a minute, the numbers are different on my screen. Sorry.
Okay.
BII.
Okay. So what we're going to do in this case is, I'm not sure with the track changes if the hyperlinks are going to work or not. Let's have a look.
It's total MFRC revenue that she's wondering how is that different from the MFS public funding.
Okay. So to answer that, what I was going to do was point to the hyperlink, because actually, no, it doesn't look like the hyperlinks are going to work in this. So basically what I've done in this document, rather than answer the question myself, because I'm not the finance person in the organization, I don't want to steer you wrong. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen here, and we're going to go to the place on the website where you can get that, because what I'm going to do in the document here is hyperlink to the funding document, which goes in great detail into some of these things and how you calculate them. Mm-hmm. Just hang on a sec, I'll just share my screen here. Okay, so we just go to the general CFMWS site and MFS, and then of course the MFRC, and then I think that it's all things funding. So if you just scroll down, you reach the funding section partway down. So again, this will be hyperlinked in the document, so you don't have to go through these steps, but I just want to show you where you can find it. So under Funding Central there, you've got miscellaneous documents, and this one here, MFSP Funding and Reporting Guide, is likely the one that you want to be having a look at. Try to access it on my computer here.
Perfect, yeah, because my other question was related to whether or not a specific expense is calculated into user fees, so that would probably be in there as well.
Yeah, exactly. So if you look under this document, it goes into how to interpret all of these elements. And if it's not clear from there, then by all means, please let me know, and I can ask Yvonne Loriot, who's our finance expert, and she can probably answer that. She can definitely answer that much better than I could.
Okay, and my last question was just, you touched on it a little bit with the direct client care. When we're referring to, it's pretty clear with counseling services, but something like child care, when it's saying direct hours, is that the emergency child care provider, or is that the coordinator at the MFRC setting up the work?
I see. Okay. So in that case, so let's have a look at the guidance and see if it's described well enough in there. Hours. All right. So, includes those families who are allocated MFRC funds for emergency child care, respite child care, and casualty support child care. So it's only does that make sense, that you would calculate the number of hours of service that were paid for through emergency childcare, emergency respite, and casualty support? Does that make sense?
B's definition isn't really in there yet, Jonathan, I don't think. Like the question she just asked, I think what's there in the guidance is A, but the B is the part that needs to be added. So what you're saying is it's the actual hours of care versus how much it takes to get that set up?
Exactly. And is that something that you guys already gather?
Yes.
Okay. So I'll make a note.
Putting that definition in there to say it's the actual hours of care into 12 will help that.
Right.
Yeah, as opposed to what coordinators do, like the direct client care that they have with the families versus the hours that the child care provider is giving to the family.
Yeah, care provided, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, excellent. Okay.
Wonderful.
Okay, that's great. So I'll insert that in child care as well as the other ones where it might be missing.
Okay. Wonderful. And those were, my questions.
Okay.
Just a comment, Jonathan, casualty support doesn't exist anymore. It's all called emergency child care.
Yeah, I wanted to include the sort of previous categories just because some people still refer to it just as a catch-all, but maybe I'll put them in brackets and just talk about emergency child care. And then
we'll be entering year 2 of there no such thing as casualty support child care. It's all under emergency child care.
Exactly, yeah. So I might just put like formerly known as or something.
Sure,
like
yeah, to capture those elements. Okay.
Yeah, okay. All right, excellent. So just making some notes to make changes here. Okay, great. Okay, Claudia, I think you had another question? Oh, hang on a sec. I keep on forgetting that Claudia is chatting with us. So the package that gets sent out before a family is posted in, do we count that in the information count? Okay. So yes, you do. You count that, so you would count that. So if we go down to awareness, so that would be without request. That would be included in the packages that are sent out. Unless, of course, you had a whole pile of families calling up from another location and saying, can you send me an information package, in which case you could gather it under the first one, but for the most part, it's likely going to be as far as I know, you receive often a list of people coming in and then you send it out to them. So it's without request. Does that make sense? Okay, so let's, and Claudia, if that doesn't make sense, feel free to write another chat here. I'll keep the chat open at the bottom. Okay, so Jens, I think you had another question as well?
Yeah, I've got a couple there, Jonathan.
Okay.
Just to go through a number of family members served. So previously we just recorded the family itself. Yeah. So if a family of 4 came in, we wouldn't count that as one family. Now it would be 4. So as a percentage, if it was a single individual in the family, that's the military members, that would be 25%, for example. Yeah. Okay. And that family per se would be as per MFS guidelines. Okay, like for example, if somebody brought, somebody extended family, it would still just be their immediate family.
Yep, that's still included under MFS guidelines. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. With respect to the veterans services, yeah. I know you mentioned to take that out, but as per the new federal budget, and that's going to be expanded to all MFRCs, that's my understanding anyway, we've after having some phone calls and that, I guess this would be something that will be added to a later date for us to include as that rolls out?
Well, what we'll probably do, just because we developed these performance measures based on feedback that we received from MFRCs as well as Chief of Military Personnel Command's working group and stuff like that. Whereas VAC developed the Veteran Family Program measures for the most part. So I'm going to keep them separate, just because the Veteran Family Program measures are changing more. First of all, they're gathered on a monthly basis rather than an annual basis, and they're also changing more depending on VAC direction. So I want to keep them out. I want to keep them separate as much as possible, just because it's a different reporting period, and it's also different people who are kind of making decisions about how to change them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like for us now, this is new to us, so it's we've been receiving some questions and stuff on it. Also, just to go up the substantive versus the fleeting contact.
Yeah.
So for us, our goal is to try to capture as much information as we can, and that's what you want to see. So if somebody just shows up to a program occasionally, how do we, like if I do special events, so for example, if I have 100 families show up, and 25% of them I see pretty well, you know, every week, every month, occasional, some guys probably here, some families there. So which ones, am I capturing them all, or just do I go to the ones that I'm going to record that are the ones that we capture the most information on?
Right. So basically, do your use your judgment as to what is a substantive or fleeting contact. But there is I think I included a definition in the guidance here at some point.
Yeah, I was going through that, but like I know when I brief with this with some staff and say, okay, so if somebody calls and you know, they look for some information, so how do we just, they're not captured at all. We're focused on the ones who are really using the center more than, you know, at what percentage?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a person who uses the center a lot. What we're looking to eliminate, when in doubt, include the statistic, first of all. That's a good rule of thumb, is that if a family contacts you, chances are they should be included in your statistics. The things that we want to weed out are the things which are really really insubstantial contacts, like a family calls up and they're looking for the address of the MFRC, or a family calls up and they want to know what's the closest bank to the MFRC, or something like that. You know, it's a fairly, there's not a whole lot of data shared. It's probably just a few seconds, whereas a family who calls up asking about, so what do you guys offer? We're new to the area. And then you share a whole bunch of stuff about programs and services. That's a much more substantive contact, and that should be included, even if it's only a 2-minute conversation.
Sure. Okay, great.
Yep.
So just going back to when you were talking about like a special event where 100 people show up. Right. So Deployment Services has a Christmas party. They've put out an invitation to the community deployment families, and 60 people show up. But maybe 8 of those families are like immersed in the support from the MFRC, and the others may be staff on their days off coming to support, things like that. Would you be tracking the 60, or are you tracking just like the 8 families and their members? Right.
So, and great question, because it'll all depend on what happens at the session there. Let's say, for instance, it's like a trade show where people are coming around. There's no real official presentation or anything like that. People are just occasionally stopping by a kiosk. Then I would only count the people who come by and actually take information and ask questions and stuff. So I wouldn't count everyone at that particular location. However, if it was a trade show where you were actually giving a presentation to all the attendees at the beginning of it about the services at the MFRC, then I'd include all those people, because you shared information with each one of them, which is fairly substantive. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, I'm just going to check under.
Sorry, but just to make sure, in terms of in-house things, so something like a social gathering, like when we, as I said, we do like an open house sort of thing. Which way are we going? Are we going towards only the people who sort of have had direct contact regarding the support services, or the people who all show up?
Well, again, I'd use your judgment as to how many people showed up and what percentage. Like, you could even apply a percentage. Like, if you don't have exact numbers, let's say that you have 100 attendees, and you know that probably about 3/4 of them spent some time with one of the staff members talking about services, then basically that's how I'd calculate that.
Okay. Wonderful.
So Jonathan, for example, I'll give you an example. One of our programs or service we do over Christmas, a breakfast with Santa, we have about 300 people. And the way we go through it. Now, the amount of time that we actually spend talking to families instead of trying to rifle through 300 people to their breakfast and their gifts and everything like that, we don't have very much time to talk, okay? So for those 300 people, is that like just a statistical no-show?
Yeah, unless, like, chances are the people who show up to the Christmas have probably accessed services in some other way at the MFRC. So yeah, for the purposes of the Christmas party, it may not be included in statistics because they didn't actually. All they did was they brought their kids, and I've got kids too, so I know what that's like. And there's a bunch of screaming kids around, and you're just trying to manage their behavior, and they didn't really have a chance to ask anyone anything. And that wasn't really their priority that day. So yeah, I wouldn't include them if that's the case, if there wasn't a whole lot of information shared either way. But having said that, chances are a person who knows about the Christmas party and is choosing to bring one of their kids and attend probably is attending some of the other services like childcare and some of the other activities. So they'll probably be included, that's what I mean.
Okay.
Yeah. Does that make sense? Like they'd already be included under, the other categories like employment or contact with some other type of service.
Okay.
Yeah. Sounds like you have another question there.
I have one about section 1 and 2.
Okay.
I just want to make sure that we're actually doing this correctly.
Sure.
So measure 1 is basically anyone who we have serviced on a substantial level. So anyone who comes through the door, engages in a workshop, meets with our staff, they are all tracked. Yeah. So then in terms of 2, can you clarify 2 for me?
Sure. The reason why I included number of family contacts is because this goes back to the idea that it's very difficult to identify unique family members, right? Because they don't have a barcode that you scan, and therefore it's difficult to tell whether or not a particular family member has accessed both employment and education services and other services and whatnot. Also, using just number of family members served as a stat, I'm not a big fan of, because even though it's very popular in the not-for-profit world and within national defense to look at number of family members served, that doesn't really show the burden of effort at the local level. Because as you know, as a whatever kind of staff person at the MFRC, you might have one person who accesses 10 services or contacts you 50 times in 1 month. And so saying that you served one person is a lot less reflective of your workload than saying that you served one person 50 times. So the 50 times would be number of family contacts. So that would be, you might have one family member who contacts you, let's say, contacts the flow or the social worker 20 times in a month. That would be 20, that would count as 20 family contacts. number of family members are the individual family members that you serve throughout the year. And this number is also notoriously inaccurate, just because it's very difficult for you guys to calculate all the numbers, which is why, again, I like to rely more on the contacts number, but we're always asked about number of family members, so I had to leave that one in there.
Wonderful. Okay, so we are doing it correctly. I just all of a sudden was like, have I been telling people the wrong thing all along? So,
yeah.
Good.
Okay, and Claudia, let me check the chat here. Where is the best place to capture our deployment measures going into this new fiscal year? It will be a huge impact to us. Yes. Okay. So the deployment measures. That's a good question. So let's have a look through here. So probably, I know that this question came up in the past as well, because we looked at sort of the traditional breakdowns of education, employment, mental health. We didn't look so much at deployment or family separation and reunion because we included it, we folded it into some of the other categories. And I was reluctant to include deployment just because it would be an additional burden, statistical burden for you guys at the local level to calculate. So what I would do is actually break it down by what is the subject of the deployment services that you're offering. So let's say, for instance, that you're offering deployment services for children and youth. Chances are a lot of those services in terms of peer support groups, talking about deployments, talking about the cycle of deployments, what's a normal reaction to family separation and reunion, all these kinds of things. Those I would put actually under mental health services because it is the main subject category of that deployment service is mental health services, whereas some of the other deployment services that you offer might relate more to childcare or some of the other categories. So I would split them according to the categories that you have in there currently, and there will be dialogue boxes after each one of these where if you feel like, you know what, this is not exactly the right category for this, but I'm not sure where else to put it, then please just write that in the dialogue box afterwards with the numbers that you have, and that way I'll be able to gather that data as well. But chances are deployment services, a lot of it will be related to mental health in terms of dealing with pre-deployment, during the deployment, and post-deployment.
But Jonathan, where I would put that and have put that would be under the family contacts, under information and education awareness, because it specifically lists education programming, parenting, psychosocial deployment.
Yeah, and that's, so you're talking about number one here, right?
Yeah, so that's where my numbers would go to reflect.
Exactly. So the number one is a catch-all for all areas, right? So that includes mental health services, employment, education, everything. It's broken down into those three categories because those are the three that are mentioned in parameters. Yeah. But this is number of family contacts for all services provided to families. So yes, you're right. It is captured in there as well.
But I would put it additionally, I would put it under mental health services?
If you feel like it's really a judgment call on your part. If you feel like it's really, you know what, there are so many other things that we're covering rather than just mental health services, then I would just include it under number one here, as you've done. If you feel like it's mainly, you know, how to cope psychologically through the deployment process, then you could include it under the mental health section as well. Does that make sense?
I'm still kind of confused because now you're going to have people putting those numbers in different places, and how does that reflect when you're comparing?
Because what we're doing is the number one is a catch-all for all services, whereas the breakout of, so the individual subcategories of number of family contacts mental health would be a subset of that.
So it would be outreach and engagement in mental health?
Peer support, psychoeducational.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out where it would.
Yeah, and it really, again, there's such a variety of deployment support services out there. It really depends on what you're offering, but I'd put it under what you feel is the best fit.
But unless we note that, you're not going to know that that's specifically deployment.
Right.
So to what benefit does it have to have us having it in two areas?
Well, the benefit of putting it under mental health, if it's predominantly about mental health services, is that it's really important for us to be able to track how much families are using different types of services, because right now we're getting certain messages through the various surveys that are going out, and that's the community survey and that. So we want to make sure that we verify that information by the information that you're providing about the uptake. So let's say, for instance, right now we know anecdotally from the MFRCs that the majority of mental health services are being provided in sort of the first three areas, so outreach and engagement, peer support, psychoeducational. There's a lot less psychosocial and mental health treatment going on, although it still does happen between certain MFRCs. So we want to verify that with some of the stats that you're putting in there. So the advantage of putting that in is that that tells us how much families are accessing mental health services.
So you would put, for instance, Road to Mental Readiness, you would have us put it in both categories. You'd have us put it in number one because it's the catch-all, but you'd have us also put it under mental health services.
That's right. Yeah.
It might be worth, currently there's nothing in the guidance document that speaks to any of that around deployment. So Road to Mental Readiness, for instance, is not mentioned, and none of those components that I can see quickly as we're speaking are reflected in that category if you're looking to see that reflected there.
Okay, so I'll mention that if it has a predominantly mental health or a predominant subject in terms of employment, education, mental health, then please include it under those categories, but if not, please include it under the catch-all category of number one.
R2MR, so I did find it. R2MR is listed under psychoeducational.
Yeah.
It's there. Yeah, I did just find it, but other ones. Okay.
Yeah, I tried to provide as many examples at the local level as possible. So mental health services, you can see.
R2MR is listed. Yep.
Yeah, so it's got a definition of direct client care. And then I've basically taken these from the mental health services framework, and I update them whenever they update that framework, just so that we're talking about the same thing. So you can see I've tried to provide as many examples as possible so that you know where to put stuff.
Okay.
Okay. So Claudia wrote, so deployment briefings, etc., then are captured under awareness. Yes, I would probably put them under that unless you had a particular subject that, let's say you were offering a deployment briefing specifically on the mental health impact of deployment and how to survive deployment psychologically or something like that, then that might fall better under the mental health section. But really, it's a judgment call on your part. You're on the ground, so you know better as to whether or not it's a general awareness briefing about general deployment services and the impact of deployments, or whether or not it's specific to a mental health issue. What happens when we co-facilitate a workshop? Intercom with PSP, who captures those stats? Okay, so I would still capture those stats under yours, and you can always put in the dialog box that this was co-facilitated with PSP. As will be the case, you might co-facilitate certain things with the flow might with the JPSU and stuff like that, and certain other organizations. So feel free to put that under the dialog box, but do include them because it was part of your staff hours spent and it was in the service of military families. Okay, let's have a look and see if anyone else has their hands up here. Okay, no one else has their hands up. Any other questions?
I don't think so.
No? Okay, well, and again, we're almost at 1 o'clock, so we're right on time. But if you guys come up with other questions, or if you would find it useful, I'm happy to hold individual sessions with MFRC staff to answer any questions. And that, if you think it would be useful, we could do it via WebEx or teleconference. The idea is to try to keep this, try to make the guidance as useful as possible to you guys. So if you notice certain discrepancies or something that's missing or questions in that, don't hesitate to contact me. And so please don't let this be the last conversation that we have about this, because I don't want you guys struggling at the local level over what could just be resolved in a 5-minute telephone conversation. Alrighty, so thank you very much, you guys, for showing up today. Again, this has been recorded, so we'll see how the recording worked out with our new WebEx license, and then I'll let you guys know once it's uploaded to the website as well.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Thank you.
Thank you, folks. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.